we send our novels as well as our scholarly books out to external evaluators before we publish, because we want expert opinion to make sure that what we're publishing is actually worth reading and is likely to capture an audience. And this reviewer wrote, deftly weaving history with strong characters in conflict with both class and race, Eshleman returns the human elements, both inhuman and humane, that are so often stripped away from history. This novel is a Pachacuti, a world turning in itself, leaving the reader dazzled beneath a fiery Andean sun. I give you the fiery Andean sun.
Thank you, Bob. And welcome. I'm so glad so many people turned out. I see colleagues, friends and colleagues, and the public, so, and a neighbor who's also a friend. So can everybody hear me? Yes, okay. So tonight I'm going to be talking about my historical novel, Pachacuti, World Overturned. It's set in Ecuador in the 18th century against the backdrop of a revolt, an uprising. The cover captures this setting. It's a painting by American artist Frederick Edwin Church, who traveled to Ecuador in the mid-19th century and painted a series of well-known paintings of volcanoes and lakes. And this is one of those, Mount Cotopaxi erupting. Now you might look at this cover and wonder, well, what is that word? It's Pachacuti. How do you pronounce it? Well, you heard me, so. This is a Quichua Indian word, which is one of the big indigenous native languages of South America. And it basically means world overturned or world turning. Pacha is world, Kuti is turning. This basically sums up the idea of a cyclical view of time. The idea that every once in a while there's a new age that begins and overturns everything that came before that. Of course, that could be a hopeful thing or it could be a negative thing. For the Inca people of the Andes, they saw the Spanish conquest in the 16th century as a Pachacuti, which deprived them of their rights and power. And ever after that, they were waiting for another Pachacuti, which would reverse the fortunes of the Spanish and the Indians. So that's the premise of my novel. An uprising in the 18th century kingdom of Quito, which is what Ecuador was called in that period, raises hopes of a Pachacuti. And it also entwines the lives of 3 people and others, and quite a few characters. The whole story mirrors the relationships between the conquerors, the Spanish, and the conquered, the native people. So I'm going to give you some backstory to my novel, starting with the setting, then the main characters and themes, and if we have time, I'll talk a little bit about my research. So not everyone knows where Ecuador is. Is there anyone who has been to Ecuador? Quite a few people. Okay. So I'll assume then that most of you know where it is. But it is in South America, sandwiched here between Colombia and Peru. It's a small country, but it has a lot going on, and it's very diverse geographically. Okay, so here we have a map of Ecuador. Maybe I'll stay by this. And you can see the Andes Mountains running down through Ecuador like a backbone, the coastal jungle, and then to the east, the jungles of the upper Amazon with the great rivers running down towards the Amazon and Marañón rivers. This map is actually in my book. It's an 18th century map done by Juan de Velasco, who was a Jesuit, and he's actually a minor character in the book. He did this in 1789 in Italy after the Jesuit order was actually expelled from all of the Spanish Empire. And the Jesuits had very little to do after the expulsion, so a lot of them wrote books. I need a little water here. I meant to point out the capital city of Ecuador is Quito in the Andes, and that's the setting for probably half the novel. Here you can see Quito up here on the map, then the rivers going into the Amazon. As Bob said, I spent a lot of time in Ecuador, going down there for summers over a period of a number of years. And it was like a second home to me. So as I saw the beautiful places there and the rich culture, I started thinking about the novel I wanted to write. This is the other major setting of the book, besides Quito. Pululawa crater in Ecuador. It's a giant inhabited volcanic crater that collapsed, a long time ago. And it's just incredibly beautiful. At the base of the crater is a ruined hacienda. And when I saw this, I started to think, wouldn't it be great to write a novel set in this hacienda, imagining how people lived here in the 18th century. As I talk, I'm going to do some short readings from the book. This is my description of Pululawa. From the point of view of one of the main characters, Santiago, who is the ranch manager of the Pululawa hacienda. And he's brought a second main character, Ana, to the crater. At the crest, he pointed with his lip at the lush green volcanic crater that cracked open the earth like an egg. Pululawa. There was Pululawa's head, the matted green of his hair, his rocky encircling arms and green belly that fed the people of the hacienda. The Chivo, a massive guardian of stone at the entrance to the crater, was his heart. And to the northwest, his legs danced down to the lowland forest. The clouds flowed up and over Pululawa like water over rocks, clothing him in soft white, just like his name, which meant fog. Is there anything that strikes you about this description? Anything that stands out? Don't be shy. That's what I always tell my students.
It's humanized.
Right, right. Yeah, it's personified or humanized. Well, alternate terms. I think there's yet a third term you could use. And I'm not just doing this to be poetic, but to fit the worldview of Andean people who see mountains, boulders, rivers, and lakes as spirit beings. They're animate, unlike our general view of rocks and mountains as being inanimate and kind of immovable. The second setting, as I mentioned, is Quito, the capital of Ecuador, which is an amazing Baroque and Renaissance city. It's a UNESCO World Heritage Site, considered one of the best Baroque city plans that survives in the world. And it is rich with beautiful churches and convents, like the Compañía de Jesus, which is the Jesuit church in Quito. This is a key location because one of my main characters is a Jesuit. The interior is almost completely gilded with gold that the Spanish mined, that the Spanish had the native people mine for them. So from the vaults to the arches to the golden retable, this is all gilded with gold. Finally, a couple of the characters do go down to the Amazon. There were Jesuit missions on the great rivers, the Napo, the Pastaza. So that's a kind of a side trip in the novel. Now, the time period. What do you think of when you think of the 18th century? What comes to mind first? The Enlightenment, and that is a feature of my novel. Anything else? 18th century, 1700s.
Revolution.
Revolutions, right. The American Revolution, the French Revolution. And the Andean region was no different. The 18th century was an age of uprisings and rebellions. In fact, these went actually back to the 16th century. So after the Spanish conquest of the Inca Empire, there were multiple rebellions from the 16th century to the 19th century, culminating in independence from Spain. Now, different groups had different motives for rebelling. The native people, the Quichua, wanted to get their power back from the Spanish, while the descendants of the Spanish, the Creoles, wanted self-rule, and they wanted freedom from Spanish taxation and very onerous regulations and monopolies. This is from my novel. I probably won't read it, but if you want to read it, it describes some actual rebellions that took place in Ecuador in the 18th century. So again, the context for my novel is a revolt in 1766, which entwines the lives of three people. Santiago, this indigenous ranch manager, the Jesuit, Gregorio, and a young Spanish girl named Ana. And we'll look at each of these characters. I love this painting. It's a kind of romantic view of what Santiago might have looked like. So he is a kind of complex character. He's caught between the Spanish and the Indians in his position of status as the manager or mayordomo of the Pululawa Hacienda. He has power over other indigenous people. But at the same time, he's subservient to the Spanish. So the painting captures this mixed view of him. 18th century Western or European clothing, well, combined with an Inca tunic. At the very beginning, the first page of the novel, Santiago has gone to Quito. He's gotten very drunk because it's Carnival, And he wakes up in the gutter and realizes there's a revolt going on, and he's in the middle of it. On the first Sunday, I've been fighting a sore throat, so hopefully my voice won't give out. Lots of water. On the first Sunday of Lent, in a city barely risen from the ashes of Carnival, Santiago Guaman found himself an onlooker to a rebellion. He opened his eyes from the damp gutter where he had fallen the night before, just as the fiscal of the Audiencia, Don Antonio de Esquivel, was leaving his courtyard on a splendid white mare. He heard voices singing, which in his confusion he mistook for the sounds of a fiesta. And then he saw a band of Indian women come rushing down the street, skirts fluttering like wings, and grab the horse's silvery bridle. Well, things don't turn out well for Don Antonio, I'll just tell you that. So Santiago finds himself a kind of onlooker to this rebellion. And he hears people talking about the Pachacuti. And he starts to wonder, maybe, is this the Pachacuti? He knows the world has been destroyed in the past 4 times by the sun, by the flood, by snakes and pumas, and the 4th time by the señores, the Spanish. But that was a long time ago, long before the memory of anyone now living. He starts to wonder after a while if maybe he should join the revolt. And he gets his nerve up, he leans over and he's searching for a stone, but all he can come up with is sticky mud and refuse. Then he sees the militia loading a cannon, and he turns and starts to run. Then there was an explosion like an earthquake at the back of his head. The building shook, the paving stones cracked, the people around him seemed to fall away, and there was an empty howling in the air. Now the revolt changes the lives of all of the main characters. For Santiago, he becomes inspired to become a medicine man, or yachak in the Quichua language, which means simply a knower. So he goes through a path of initiation, then he starts curing and healing patients, and finally he's led into political activism. So he's trying to get in touch with his own roots, and the path he takes is a dangerous one, especially for someone in his position. So he's supposed to be doing what the hacienda owners want. Now, Andean shamanism draws its power from the natural world. One way of being chosen as a medicine person is to get struck by lightning. And this is actually quite common in the Andes, because the mountains are so high. There's not, up high there are a lot of trees. I've actually known people, spoken to people who were struck by lightning. Of course, you have to survive. Another way of getting in touch with the natural forces is to bathe in a waterfall or sacred spring. This is a way of renewing the power of a medicine person. Santiago does do that as he's preparing to be the captain of the St. John or San Juan festival. He bathes in hot falls in Pululawa crater. One step more, and he was shattered. The hawk wrenched him, tore him, lifted him in a blind white rage of flight. They soared through an icy wind that flayed his skin and pierced his eyes and ears. For a moment he glimpsed Pululawa below, like a green shadow. Then Hawk plunged, and he was falling, being driven towards the earth like a stone. But he was human, and he would die. This is what Santiago's altar or mesa for curing people would have looked like. It has, as you can see, a group of ancient axe heads laid out. Each one of these symbolizes a sacred mountain, and the medicine person will call on them to help him or her in healing people. The mesa has to be activated, and that's done by blowing trago, cane liquor, on it, by offering carnation petals, which are the favorite flower of the mountain spirits, and by calling on the mountains along with the Virgin Mary and the saints. So these are this is a kind of syncretistic ritual. This is just one of the great mountains in Ecuador, which would be spirit beings that would assist the medicine people. This is a 20th century painting. Sorry. It's done on leather, and it shows a curing scene. In the center is the medicine man. That's his patient. He's blowing tobacco smoke on the patient. And he would also blow trago, or cane liquor, as well as drink it himself. What's on his mesa? Here's the mesa right there. What do you see on there that you know about already?
Axe heads.
What?
Axe heads.
Axe heads, right. Yes. Yeah, so the axe heads representing the mountains. There's also a bottle of trago, candles, and eggs. Some of the patients have been put to bed for the night because this particular site is very remote and people would need to stay overnight who came to visit the medicine man. You can see the sacred mountains through the windows. Oops, okay. Any quick question before we leave this section? Yes?
A little farther south in Peru, the despachos or mesas, they don't feature carnations. It's usually fuchsias, I think.
Oh, okay.
And
Also nice bright color.
bright color, and also there's the glowing is across coca leaves, right? Is this common in Ecuador also?
No, the coca leaves are not so common because it was illegal to use them in the kingdom of Quito. So Spain had different laws concerning coca in different areas, and it was illegal in this particular region. There was a lot of debate, over whether to keep them or make them illegal. But every different region uses a different, well, for one thing, a different sacred substance. Here in the Andes of Ecuador, trago is used as the ritual substance. However, down in the upper Amazon, it would be ayahuasca or huanduc. And I know in parts of Peru, the San Pedro cactus is used. So it's different in different regions. So we'll have time for a few more questions at the end. Our second main character is a Jesuit priest named Gregorio. And he is a good friend of Santiago because they grew up together as children, childhood friends, in the hacienda, or at the hacienda in Pululawa Crater, which is owned by Gregorio's father. So Gregorio is upper class. He comes from a wealthy background. For him, the revolt leads to spiritual doubt. He doubts the strength of his own faith. He doubts how the church and the Spanish government have treated the native people. Since childhood, he's been drawn to indigenous rituals, but at the same time, as a Catholic, he is disturbed by these traditions. So he comes into conflict with Santiago. They're always kind of in this state of both friendship and conflict. Oh, I'll imagine this to be Gregorio. It's actually Ignatius of Loyola who founded the Jesuit order. A long episode, actually of several chapters near the center of the book, brings Gregorio down to Pululawa to officiate at the San Juan fiesta. And this brings him into conflict with Santiago. This describes Gregorio putting on his vestments, getting ready to officiate at the San Juan or St. John's fiesta. His heart beat in rhythm to the crescendo of drums, rondadores, and firecrackers outside as he bent over to fasten his sandals. It was the old familiar excitement of his youth, and overlaid a sense of shame at being filled with this childish excitement. In the back of his mind, he wondered whether Santiago had gone to Hot Falls. He knew what the captain sought there by bathing there at dawn, vain observances, but still they were tainted with paganism, no matter how many laws were passed against them. Now the fiesta of San Juan, or St. John the Baptist, in June is one of the big religious festivals in Ecuador. And it has syncretistic elements, Catholic elements, and also pre-Christian native Andean elements. Very Catholic here is the procession with the sculpture of the saint. On the other hand, this is a kind of solstice ritual blessing the very earliest fruits of the harvest. This would be either a medicine man or an elder. There are other things about the festival that would have upset, or did upset, Gregorio. And one of those was the amount of drinking that took place. So these women are sharing trago, a very, very potent sugarcane liquor. And they will offer trago to friends, kin, guests like me. And you shouldn't turn it down. That would be rude, to turn it down. So trago is used socially during the festival, but it's also used as a ritual substance to create a kind of ecstatic union with the spirit world. Another feature that upsets Gregorio in my novel is the ritual battle that is a traditional part of the San Juan fiesta. This involves Native Americans of different communities fighting over who can take the plaza. This photo taken around 1990 shows men during the San Juan festival, and they're running down towards town, ready to fight. Though it's a little blurry, you can see they're holding slingshots, stones, and other traditional Andean weapons. Not knives, not guns, but the old traditional weapons going back, 500 years and more. Although it's illegal, San Juan festivals still today have ritual battles, and they still have political implications involving ideas of the Pachacuti. In 1990, there was an indigenous uprising in Ecuador, and that took place during the summer fiestas like San Juan. A scholar, Michelle Wiebelsman, says, the San Juan, oh dear, I need some more. I could let you just read it. The San Juan ritual ultimately enacts the Andean millenarian myth of the periodic renewal of the world through a reversal of the existing order, so a Pachacuti. Finally, we come to our third main character, and this is our only fearless female tonight, besides myself. And she is a young woman, 16 years old, named Ana. She's an upper-class girl of Spanish descent living in Quito. For girls of her class, there were very limited options. You were expected to either get married and have children or enter a convent. So depending on your attitude, which one would be preferable. I don't know. But anyway, Anna's not so pleased with these options. Girls like her too, they receive very little education. But she kind of breaks the mold. She has been tainted with some Enlightenment ideas by her French tutor. Her fiancé is one of the leaders of the rebellion. We might picture Ana as looking something like this, wearing a very ornate skirt called a faldeín, and a lacy chemise. Here Anna's talking with her girlfriends before her engagement party. Anna listened to their shrill voices above the monotonous rain, a secret smile reflecting from her face in the mirror. What would they think if they knew? She's thinking about the rebellion that she knows about. They expected the world to remain locked in the same round of saints' days and dreary rains. The Indian servants, chocolate and gossip after Mass, the fatherly presence of king and church, the God-given order of things that anchored this world to the other one. Don't you want something different? She interrupted. And she's a bit of an agnostic as well, which is shocking to you-know-who. Well, she gets her wish. She does get something different, but it's not what she bargained for. Her life, too, is dramatically changed by the revolt, and she goes into hiding, really, in Pululawa crater. This is her first night in Pululawa. An edge of light showed under the door of the mayordomo's house. and there was a buzz of male voices and bursts of laughter. She could hardly face the silence that would fall if she went in, the speculative looking over, the discomfort of being out of place. It was Maria who opened the door. Maria is the housekeeper in Pululawa. "Another visitor," she cried. The room was warm and smelled of cane liquor, sweat, and smoke. Santiago Waman sat at the table with a half-empty flask of trago. Even though he was Father Gregorio's trusted servant, Anna felt a little afraid of him. So she finds herself very out of place. She's kind of fallen from her rank. She's facing a situation that is very alien to her. But at the same time, she finds something magical in Pululawa, just like I did. One night, she's out at night talking with Maria, the housekeeper. "Have a little trago to kill the chill," Maria offered. So she's already kind of changed her lifestyle. I doubt she was drinking any trago in Quito. "It was a night such as one did not often see," she commented. "Pululawa walks tonight. You can feel him in the air." She offered the gourd cup to Anna, and they both sat on the bench, watching the night. The wind comes from nowhere and goes nowhere. It is the crater's wind. It was on a night like this one that my husband's cousin was carried off 10 years ago. He was out late after drinking, and Pululawa came and took him into the crater. He went in that door on the chivo. We heard it clang shut behind him. We never saw him again. This is the chivo to the right. It's a granite monolith in Pululawa. And the local people do indeed regard it as a door into the mountain that opens about once a year. And if you aren't careful, you might get carried off in there. They also think that there is a golden hacienda inside, filled with golden corn and people in fine clothing. So it's a kind of heaven on earth, or at least a heaven in the inner world. So the themes of my novel, I think, still resonate today. We're still faced with violent uprisings and rebellion, with gender inequities, with racial and ethnic tensions. Many people still go on spiritual quests, whether to achieve self-understanding or to achieve spiritual illumination. And of course, love and friendship is something we all understand that can bridge great differences. So I wanted my novel to draw people in, not just to be something about the distant past. I also wanted it to be historically believable. So I bring in my personal experience, which included field work and interviews, lots of visits to churches and museums, going to fiestas and witnessing rituals, learning Spanish, and even some Quichua vocabulary. I also did very extensive, believe me, very extensive textual research. I used historical chronicles like Juan de Velasco's History of the Kingdom of Quito, written, as I said, in Italy in 1789. And again, he is a character in the novel. I picked up all kinds of travel narratives wherever I could find them, used bookstores, etc. This is a good one. and it's translated in English. It was written by the American ambassador to Ecuador under Abraham Lincoln in the 1860s. I read lots of anthropology, including Sacha Runa, which is about jungle people in Ecuador. I knew the author, Norman Whitten. This book was invaluable in documenting the indigenous rebellions in the Kingdom of Quito in the period I'm writing about. This more recent book tells a lot about women's status in Quito in the 18th century. And of course I had to figure out what people were wearing, and this was a very helpful book for that. Okay. So there are still some copies left of Pachacuti if you want to purchase one tonight, and I'll be signing those, or available to sign them once you buy them. You can also buy them through the Arizona Center for Medieval and Renaissance Studies, and there's a Kindle edition on Amazon. I'm working on marketing. I have an author page on Amazon, on Goodreads, where I've started a blog, and I've started my first Pinterest board, which is actually quite fun. So, thank you, and do you have any questions?